Alrighty. So we're in round 9. We've got two 8-0 players undefeated here with Brad Nelson on Temur Marvel and his opponent Steve Locke on Temur Energy. So we've seen this matchup play out a few times. The decks are pretty similar, but the biggest difference, of course, is Aetherworks Marvel in one deck and cards like Bristling Hydra in the other.
Yeah, so the question that I am really focusing on in this match is the Temur non-Marvel deck seems to be built with beating Marvel in mind. It has a much cleaner game plan, and it plays Negates main deck to answer the actual card Aetherworks Marvel. But the question on my mind is, are they just getting too fancy? I mean, to play a Temur color energy deck and not play, the card that everyone dreads in the format, is it smart or is it overthinking it?
As someone who knows a thing or two about getting too fancy, this actually does feel like they're getting too fancy. Basically, you're trading the power of Aetherworks Marvel for the upside of not ever drawing an Ulamog that's uncastable. That's the biggest difference. But given how often we've A, seen Ulamog cast, and B, how powerful Marvel is, just having your cards be Bristling Hydras and Magma Sprays and Glory Bringers, these 7s out of 10, and never having the access to the 10 out of 10, I don't know. We'll have to see how this weekend bears out between Amsterdam and Manila and here, but I suspect this is a little on the fancy side, like you said.
So Aetherworks Marvel is a deck. Well, we'll see what it can do now.
It's a deck.
Wow, that's a lot of lands.
Is that literally 5 lands in a Harness Lightning? So at this point, Brad would be in violation of the rule you guys had during playtesting.
The 6-second rule.
Yes. Can you explain that rule?
Yeah. So the rule is quite simply, you activate Marvel, the opponent gets to count to 6. Once you get to 6, it's too late. You can't put Ulamog into play. If you're deciding between, like Harness Lightning, Rogue Refiner, or something like that, okay, take your time, think about it. But just don't keep me on the hook for that long and then play Ulamog.
So Brad does not have an Ulamog to play, hence the thinking. So he's deciding, it looks like, between Harness Lightning and Attune with Ether.
Yeah, also deciding if he casts Harness Lightning, he could just bank 3 energy if he has plenty of lands in hand. That might be his best option. So to get back to talk about the overall matchup here, Aetherworks Marvel is a deck with a very impressive Plan A. I mean, we've seen Ulamog Ceaseless Hunger cast as early as turn 4 off of Aetherworks Marvel. That's great. That's the best thing you can do in Standard. It also has a reasonable Plan B in terms of using energy cards and creatures like Whirler Virtuoso and Rogue Refiner to sometimes steal wins with Beatdown. Sometimes it sideboards extra creatures, Glory Bringer, Bristling Hydra, Tireless Tracker, or whatever it might be. Now, the Temur non-Marvel deck is just doing that Plan B much better. The biggest upside, as you mentioned, never having to draw Ulamog Ceaseless Hunger, but also just, these creatures are very powerful in their own rights. If you can get down a resilient threat like Whirler Virtuoso or Bristling Hydra, then you can just sit back on that and use the really efficient counter spells and removal to win the game pretty easily.
And unfortunately for Steve Locke here, Brad has already resolved an Aetherworks Marvel, so his negate no longer will stop that. And that puts Steve in a position where he needs to kill Brad before Brad gets too many more spins at that Marvel.
That's one of the things that I find so difficult about beating Marvel is, Negate's the best card against Aetherworks Marvel. You can stop it before it ever hits the battlefield, but when a spell's only 4 mana, it's hard to play the entire game without ever tapping your mana, and,
So
you want to play out a 3-drop creature on turn 3.
And in which case gives him the opening for Marvel. Worth noting, Steve played a Tireless Tracker here, but did not have a land to follow it up with. So killing that Servant of the Conduit from Brad's side of the board seems like it may have worked out.
Temur mid-range has seemed to be cursed in the feature match area, at least the matches that I've covered. Last round, Scott Lipp missed land drops in all 3 of the games he played, playing Temur non-Marvel deck.
Do you think that Temur mid-range decks should think about playing more than 15 lands? Or
Yeah, I mean, a tune with Ether makes you want to push your luck, but should play more than that.
Looking at this list, Steve Locke has 21 lands plus 4 tunes, so not an unreasonable amount. So Brad was able to glimmer on his turn 5, but that gets him up to 4 energy. Didn't have the attune to follow it up with to get up to the full 6.
I like that Brad main phase the Glimmer. Might as well give yourself a chance to hit the perfect card and attune and spin Marvel. But also, you just want to resolve your important card before the opponent has an opportunity to have negate, censor, dispel, anything like that.
Steve's still not playing lands, but does have a Whirler Virtuoso to add to the board here. Rogue Refiner will get Brad up to that 6 energy, and if he desires, he has another chance of spinning the Marvel.
I saw Ulamog.
Oh, yeah.
Well within the 6-second parameter there.
Oh, yeah, Brad respects the rules. So now he has the option of taking out some threats or taking out some lands or some combination of the two. What would you lean towards?
Well, I don't care about the Rogue Refiner, but Whirler Virtuoso and Tireless Tracker are both somewhat unique threats that are a bit annoying. Perhaps this is not going to be a Tireless Tracker game. There's no way Cracking Clues is going to contend with an Ulamog. And really, there's no way anything's going to contend with an Ulamog if Steve decides to pick him up.
Yeah, Steve actually, Brad got 2 of his lands, then the 3rd land as they all went away. So that'll do it for game 1. Brad Nelson up a game here, and we'll be back with game 2 after these messages. Omaha. Blue Scott Vargas here with Reed the Bones Duke, as he's commonly known. And we're on our last round of today. We've got Brad Nelson here up a game, Aetherworks Marvel against Temur Energy. No current live look-ins. Everyone is shuffling, but we will be taking a look at this match as soon as we can.
You know, I actually don't mind that because we get a rare opportunity to glimpse how the players are sideboarding. And the first thing I notice about what Brad's doing is all 4 Woodweaver's Puzzle Knots are potentially going to be out of his deck. That's a strategy that I was employing when I played Temur Marvel, because after sideboard, I expect it to be difficult to resolve Aetherworks Marvel. And if you're not resolving Aetherworks Marvel, then Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot is just a very poor card. It leaves you, down on card advantage in a matchup that tends to be really close and run on thin margins. So I'd rather plan for the tougher games, which are the ones that I don't resolve Marvel, and cut the Puzzle Knots from my deck.
Yeah, and the counterplay here with sideboarding is interesting based on, like you've mentioned in earlier rounds, is because how many creatures do you think your opponent has in? Do you want cards like Magma Spray in your deck? Do you care about having Harness Lightning? To what numbers? Certainly from Brad's side, it's a little bit easier because he knows that Steve has to play a bunch of creatures to win the game. That is what Steve's deck is doing. From Steve's side, Brad has a little bit more flexibility with how many creatures he can leave in his deck and where he wants his tireless trackers to end up. So that gives Steve a little bit more difficulty when sideboarding.
Definitely. Yeah, I think it would be reckless for him to go down to 0 removal spells, because then you risk something like a tireless tracker running away with the game while you're trying so hard with your negates to fight the actual card Aetherworks Marvel. But he doesn't want to keep in all of his removal spells, because he definitely is going to be the beatdown, and he wants to make sure he sticks a threat or multiple threats in order to put Brad on a clock. Now, he does have some versatile answer cards in his sideboard, including cards that destroy artifacts like Manglehorn, and some more all-purpose removal spells in Confiscation Coup and Cut Ribbons. Those ones I like after sideboarding.
I really want to see Ribbons get cast, which is, reminder, it's X black, but Steve has 4 Ether Hubs and 4 Servants of the Conduit. So it doesn't seem completely unrealistic for this to happen. Just mostly unrealistic.
Well, by the time you really need it, on turn 20, maybe you'll have the double black. But Cut, not an unreasonable card just on its own. Aside from Harness Lightning, it's not trivially easy for red to deal 4 damage to a creature that early in the game, but it can kill things like Greenbelt Rampager or Winding Constrictor, stuff that Magma Spray doesn't quite do the job.
Steve is on the play here. Looking at an opening hand of Tireless Tracker, Bristling Hydra, Glorybringer, and Land. So a 3-drop, 4-drop, and a 5-drop. What do you think about that kind of hand?
Yuck. That's very borderline. It feels like you're not likely to win unless you draw a 2-drop on your first turn. But mulliganing's bad too, so I guess I would slightly lean towards mulliganing, but I wouldn't fault someone. It's just a really borderline hand. What do you think?
On the play, I think I would keep it, but I do not like the hand, and I would not argue too vehemently against someone who wants to mulligan it. Got a live look in here. Matthias Hunt playing Black-Green Constrictor Dado against Emory Allen. Undefeated, though, with a draw. 7-0-1 on Temur Marvel, and looks like it's going to be Temur, no Marvel, in just a second here, because there's a Dispossess currently in the process of being resolved.
Yeah, so this is kind of a clinic on cards like Dispossess, where Hunt gets to land it. It is his big sideboard card for the matchup, and he gets to strip away the Marvels from Emory Allen. He even gets one out of Allen's hand, which is great. This is the best Dispossess can be. However, Hunt has no creatures on the battlefield, and Allen has a hand full of other cards that he can spend his mana on, including Glimmer of Genius. So it is very conceivable that Allen could just use the tempo advantage, of having a clean board on turn 3, Hunt casting Dispossess rather than casting a creature. And maybe he can just win a game fair and square with Glimmer of Genius.
Looks like Allen also only has 3 Marvels in his deck, potentially. But our first match is going, so we'll be heading back there to see how Steve and Brad are faring. And neither player has anything in play by, looks like Steve's turn 3, though. That will change soon, I suspect.
We did see Brad mulligan, but presumably kept 6 cards and has a fine start here.
Rogue Refiner matches a Harness Lightning, leaving Brad up on energy, but Steve up 2 energy and a card. So I would say that was advantage Steve there. This is a critical card in a lot of the decks in this format.
He goes for the tracker rather than the bristling Hydra. Neither one really plays around Sensor relevantly. The Hydra, and neither one plays around Harness Lightning for that matter either, because Brad can respond to the Hydra's energy trigger by pointing a removal spell at it.
Steve netting a clue out of the exchange.
So there's Brad again with the main phase Glimmer play.
Keenly aware of the counterspells present in Steve's deck and seeing no advantage to waiting.
Just a poor man's Read the Bones in this case.
Well, Read the Bones is one of the the pinnacles of human development, so it's really hard to match up against it. Steve Locke choosing to play a Lily 2-drop, a Long Tusk Cub, and that could be a signal that he's sending to Brad.
Yeah, fairly convenient to pass with 2 mana open here, representing a counterspell, and can crack the clue at the end of the turn if he doesn't need to spend his mana. But this is strange. He had 4 lands in his opening hand, right, and has failed to draw another one.
That's what it looks like. Brad passing without doing anything. Steve goes to crack the clue, and Brad looks like he's got another Glimmer here.
Good timing by Brad. Last time he main phased it because he wanted to do it when Steve was tapped out. This time he waits for Steve to crack the clue. An opponent missing land drops can't really afford to do nothing with his or her mana, and Brad knows that, so he picked the right moment to cast the Glimmer.
And Brad under a little pressure from Long Tusk Cub, but Steve's still going to look to increase his board presence here.
So Brad likely trying to set up a turn where he can cast a threat and have his own counterspells back up, like Aetherworks Marvel plus Dispel, something along those lines. But you're right that if the Long Tusk Cub goes unanswered for a while, it might get out of range.
And do you think it's generally best practices to board in Dispel if you're Marvel against decks like Temur Energy?
I think so, yes, at least in some numbers, because it's no secret that everyone's loading up on permission spells to try to beat Marvel. So if you see an opponent with blue mana, they're probably going to have, 3 or more counterspells against you post sideboard, and Dispel is just such a nice tempo play. I think it's worthwhile.
Cub grows to a 3/3, hitting Brad for 3 and giving Steve 2 more energy here. And it's followed by another Long Tusk Cub.
Ooh, Brad has drawn Confiscation Coup, which is an excellent answer to Long Tusk Cub, especially when Brad's sitting on a reserve of 7 energy already. Question is, can he resolve it?
And Steve's still choosing to play 2 mana spells, leaving a bunch of mana up. Would not be surprising if Brad predicted some counter spells here. Lumbering falls from Brad. So he has not missed any land drops. He's content just to keep playing lands and passing the turn.
Brad's going to respect it that Steve has gone so far out of his way to pass with mana open these last few turns, Brad doesn't want to just run one of his expensive sorcery speed cards into a negate. But the question is, what will he do? He can't just take hits from these Long Tusk Cubs forever.
Tune with Ether from Steve, so he is ensuring that he's going to hit a land drop this turn.
This is actually the exact type of game that Steve wants to play. He's got some threats on the table. Brad, at some point, is going to have to make a move to deal with them, and Steve can sit back on his efficient counterspells now, uses energy to help protect and grow his creatures. This is the non-Marvel game that the Temur Energy deck is built for, and we see the Temur Energy deck just playing it a lot better than Brad's deck is.
Yeah, and Steve has multiple counters in hand, ceremonious, rejection, and negate, so he's going to be able to have double counters against most of the things Brad could threaten to do. So Steve removing 2 energy to try to put a plus counter on the 2/2 Long Tusk Cub. Brad targeting it with Harness Lightning in response.
I would have liked to see Steve just pass priority there, because it's clear with Brad passing 5 mana open that he's going to want to pick a fight at some point.
Well, the second Long Tusk Cub attempting to grow, and Brad again having a Harness Lightning. So
Wow, and just like that, the tables have turned.
Steve choosing not to fight over either of those Harness Lightnings. Bristling Hydra putting Steve back up to 3 energy, but now he's tapped down to a single blue source. Brad, you'd say pretty aware of Ceremonious Rejection here?
It's a good question. It's a card that is going to be on Brad's radar, but it's not nearly as common as negate is, so I could see Brad deciding this is a clear moment to go for it. That was a really interesting turn. Steve definitely noticed a shields down moment and clearly values Bristling Hydra quite highly. I can't say I disagree with that valuation, but I think he could have ended the turn with a bit more energy if he had just passed priority rather than trying to grow the Long Tusk Cubs.
So Brad cycling Sensor and then casting another Glimmer of Genius, knowing that Steve can't counter it unless he has Dispel.
And while the Bristling Hydra is a very resilient threat, it's actually not clocking Brad as quickly as the Long Tusk Cubs were. You know, Steve's going to want to sit on energy rather than growing it proactively, and just 4 damage per turn. It's going to take, well, 5 turns to kill Brad.
Brad hit a good Glimmer. He hit Dispel plus Aetherworks Marvel. He was missing both of those things. But Steve has double Counterspell up, so unless Brad can find another Counterspell or Steve taps low again, Brad is going to potentially resolve Aetherworks Marvel here.
So to Brad's credit in this game, he spent a lot of time setting up his draw with Glimmer of Genius, but he set it up quite well, and he was able to win the fight over both Long Tusk Cubs with Harness Lightning, and now he's bought himself a bit of time and is setting up for another big turn where, you know, as you set the stage, they're probably going to wind up fighting a battle over Aetherworks Marvel. Notably, Shrine of Shaken Gods is now active and can produce 2 mana for casting the Marvel. It's not just for Ulamog.
So Brad drew a second Marvel this turn. He's going to get to go Marvel, Dispel, Marvel.
Wow.
Into Steve's potential answers. And Steve has another negate here, but that second Marvel means that Brad is going to resolve an Aetherworks Marvel this turn and get to use it.
I think Brad has played great this game.
Right, he's getting rewarded for it. He played around counterspells, didn't give Steve the opportunity to use them, so it made it so Steve has less threats on the board than he would have otherwise. He spent multiple turns with mana up, not doing anything. And yes, I think Brad did get a little lucky to draw Marvel Dispel over, in 4 cards, something along those lines. But it's only because he maneuvered the game to this position that he's able to take advantage of that.
Yeah, he showed very good patience. I'll admit if I was in his position, I would have felt a bit of urgency against the Long Tusk Cubs and might have tried to rush something like the Confiscation Coup. But Brad really took his time, picked his spot, and here he is, with 8 lands and Aetherworks Marvel and a relatively high life total.
And Brad choosing not to spin the Marvel right now. It looks like he might be waiting.
Yeah, I like that choice. He has the option to do it when Steve attacks, potentially threatening to just find a giant blocker and kill the Bristling Hydra. He also could just do it at the end of Steve's turn. If this was a pure mirror, he might have to worry a little bit about Censor and perhaps use it sooner rather than later. But it seems pretty likely at this point from Brad's perspective that Steve doesn't have Censor in his deck.
And is likely running pretty low on counterspells.
So Brad could activate the Marvel in response to this, just in case one of his best cards is Censor for the Glorybringer. But he could also wait and try to hit Ulamog. I did notice that Brad left Chandra Flamecaller in his deck, so if he lets Steve attack and then hits Chandra, he could ensure that she survives.
He could also hit Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger.
Yeah, the mid-combat Ulamog going to be able to block the Hydra. I think this game is over.
Yeah, Brad can exile Steve's other 2 creatures and then block the Hydra. He could also try to exile the Hydra, but Steve can not only give it hexproof, he also wouldn't even need to because it's just going to get blocked anyway.
So, yeah, I mean, this is a disaster for Steve Locke. The one way I could see him getting back into this game is if he draws Confiscation Coup. He would have exactly enough mana to take the Ulamog.
Brad also has the ability to just cast Confiscation Coup here to just gain more energy if he wants to spin the Marvel again.
Now, interesting, I think he should be thinking about Confiscation Coup. That's usually the only way the Temur colors can get rid of an Ulamog, short of their own Ulamog. So it's a bit of a strange dynamic that if Steve has Confiscation Coup and Brad draws a brick, he'll be stuck with only 9 energy, not able to take the Ulamog back. Okay, I didn't see the Lumbering Falls there. That is a pretty good way to spend his mana, but I was considering whether Brad would want to just cash in the Confiscation Coup for some energy and another spin at the Marvel. Oh, the Confiscation Coup would have been the top card. Well,
Wow.
maybe not. I'm not sure exactly the way things came off.
And
But
Steve has a second one in his
case.
sideboard, so he may still have one in his deck here.
Harness Lightning. That's it.
Not going to do it. Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger, devours yet another victim. And Brad Nelson moves to an undefeated 9-0 here. Day 1 of Grand Prix Omaha, defeating Steve Locke, who falls to 8-1. We've got a live look in here. Matthias Hunt and Emory Allen. They're on game 3. And it looks like Harness Lightning taking down a Glint Sleeve Siphoner.
So this is one of the classic matchups of Standard, Black-Green Constrictor versus Temur Marvel. I've heard conflicting opinions about which deck is advantaged in this matchup, but both of these players having an excellent day with their respective weapon of choice. when we last looked in, we saw
Exactly this.
an identical situation with Matthias casting Dispossess on an empty board, and it looked like he went on to win that game, which, not surprising. Getting rid of the Marvels certainly takes a lot of the wind out of the sails of the Temur deck.
And again, Emory Allen has 3 Aetherworks Marvels in his deck, it looks like, but both times he was unlucky enough to have one in his hand when Dispossess hit him.
Yeah. With the cards in Emory Allen's hand, it looks like it's going to be tough to assemble a winning strategy here. He can certainly survive a long time. He can kill the next few threats that Matthias plays, but how he's going to win himself, I'm not sure. The Dispel, he surely brought in to be able to beat Blossoming Defense. He must have identified that as a really troublesome card.
Looking a little light on targets right now, though he might pick a fight with Harness Lightning at some point later. Dispel is a card that loses some of its luster once your opponent knows about it.
Definitely. And that's probably a big reason to maybe not bring it in the Black-Green Constrictor matchup, because you can expect them to have four to 7, ways of attacking your hand that are sorceries. So it seems pretty likely that by the time there's going to be a big fight with a Blossoming Defense and a Dispel, that the Constrictor player may have seen it coming.
Matthias' 4th land comes into play tapped, his Quagmire, so he's only able to play one of his 2 drops in hand, and it looks like his hand is a lot of options here, but he went with a Winding Constrictor.
Perhaps bait.
So Matthias does have a Blossoming Defense, as Emory targets Winding Constrictor with Harness Lightning, but he also knows about the Dispel, so he knows if he casts Blossoming Defense here, it's very, very likely to get dispelled.
Yeah.
Would your inclination be to just let this resolve?
I think so. I also think Hunt should have, decided what he was going to do beforehand here, since he does know about the Dispel and the Harness Lightning. Since he decided to cast it, there's no real cost, but if he had thought for a long time and then said, okay, I'll grudgingly put my Winding Constrictor in the graveyard, then it might be giving away a bit too much information.
Dispel does in fact counter the Blossom Defense, and then Matthias follows up with 2 Glint Sleeve Siphoners. So he's hoping at least one of these survive so he can draw an extra card here.
And that is a great reason for Hunt to bite the bullet and cast Blossoming Defense, is that it leaves him with enough mana to tap out for 2 2-drop creatures this turn.
Tireless Tracker from Emory Allen, exactly the kind of card he's looking for?
Exactly the kind of card, yeah. This is just what he needs. He needs something that's going to allow him to see more than just 1 card per turn, because eventually he's going to need to be casting at least Chandra, if not Ulamog, to win this game. And it's hard to do that on a 1 card per turn income.
As a reminder, players, if you finish day 1 with a record of 6-3 or better, that's 18 or more match points, you will be back tomorrow for day 2.
Matthias
Day 2 will begin
deciding
at
how he wants to
9
sequence his cards to get the most value off of Rishkar Pima Renegade here.
Please make sure that you're here in time to be seated and ready to play at 9 a.m.
Well, he has a clean attack with the Glint Sleeve Siphoner due to Menace. He wants to manage his creatures in a way that they can continue attacking through Tireless Tracker, even if Emory Allen cracks a clue or 2. And then he also knows about a Chandra Flamecaller, so if he can get something up to, well, really every point of toughness matters. Getting something up to 4 toughness is big, getting something up to 5 toughness perhaps bigger. For that reason, I like putting at least one of the counters on Long Tusk Cub.
At some point, I think Matthias should make some kind of play, regardless of which one it ends up being. He could also not play both his creatures to play around Chandra Flamecaller. That is a possibility.
I would have played both and put the counter on the Long Tusk Cub, because if you threaten a 4/4 Long Tusk Cub, then Chandra would have to -4, killing herself and the Tireless Tracker, and leaving basically a clean board with just the Hissing Quagmires.
So Matthias opted to activate Hissing Quagmire, attack with Quagmire and the Glint Sleeve Siphoner, and then just play a Long Tusk Cub, leaving Rishkar back in hand. So not quite as much pressure. And if Emory Allen doesn't have a 6th land here, then I think Emory would prefer not facing down quite as many creatures.
It looks like he has a 6th land, but it comes into play tapped. So he can either pass with the option to activate Lumbering Falls, or he can start cracking clues on his own main phase. You see him very thoughtfully leaving up double red in case he draws into Sweltering Suns.
Cracking a clue and playing Botanical Sanctum. Passing the turn back with a 4/3 Tireless Tracker that threatens to become a 5/4 against Long Tusk Cub and Glint Sleeve Siphoner. Matthias now has to decide whether he wants to spend 2 energy in order to draw a card here.
I think he should. I mean, it's good to think about the worst case scenario, which is like, okay, what if I just draw 2 basic forests? But a lot of the cards in his deck produce energy, and he might just wind up paying back the energy with the extra card he draws if he finds something like Attune with Ether.
And it looks like Matthias disagreed with that assessment. He did not draw an extra card off Glint Sleeve Siphoner and drew a Hissing Quagmire for his turn.
Yeah, I worry that he's playing a bit too passively in this game.
Perhaps giving Emory Allen a little too much time.
But this is relevant that now all 3 of his attackers, the Glint Sleeve Siphoner is not blockable, but either of the other 2 attackers would successfully trade with Tireless Tracker.
And it looks like the Tireless Tracker is going to jump in front of the Long Tusk Cub, forcing Matthias to use up all 4 energy to enable a trade.
So this cleans up the creatures. Emory Allen could play Chandra and -1, and if Hunt doesn't have an untapped 8th land, Chandra could threaten to survive the turn, so long as she doesn't get hit by both Quagmires. But the Rishkar are actually very, very relevant here in that it would allow a single Hissing Quagmire to attack for 3 with just the 7 lands Matthias Hunt has.
So Chandra's prospect's not looking great here.
Yeah, if I was in Allen's shoes, not knowing about the Rishkar, this is the play I would make. I would play Chandra and -1 to get rid of the Siphoner.
Yeah. So Allen's choosing to -3 Chandra.
That's to play around Blossoming Defense. It's very conservative, very safe, but it means that Chandra will die no matter what.
A draw of Sky Sovereign, console flagship from Matthias, which actually can take out Chandra as well.
Yeah, perfect. He doesn't have to risk Magma Spray that way either. Yeah.
Alan is also getting fairly close to being able to cast Ulamog, because it looks like a shrine in his hand, Shrine of the Forsaken Gods, and that means that if Alan does actually happen to draw an Ulamog, then it's
Yeah.
quite castable.
Now, Hunt and Alan know the answer to this. We don't, but it's possible Emory has boarded out some number of Ulamogs. If he was boarding out Marvels, stands to reason that he might not keep the maximum number of Ulamogs in his deck.
That makes sense.
He has 3 to begin with. Maybe went down to 2. Who knows?
Looks like Matthias is going to animate the Hissing Quagmire and follow it up with Rishkar Pima Renegade here.
Yeah, this is perfect because if it's successful, Rishkar can crew the Sky Sovereign itself, and the Quagmire can attack for 3.
And it looks like Emory may have a response. He's got a Harness Lightning in hand. Where do you see that lightning going?
Perhaps at the Sky Sovereign itself.
And indeed it does. Harness Lightning, with the help from a few other energy, can take down Sky Sovereign.
Now, it's tough. I mean, he could easily trade the Lumbering Falls with the Hissing Quagmire, but if casting Ulamog is a big part of the game plan, then that's not so appealing. Also, Hunt has 3 Hissing Quagmires, so killing 1 is not really going to slow down the onslaught that much. Oof, looks like he picked up a land and an attune.
That Lumbering Falls potentially becoming more relevant here. I could only spot 1 Ulamog, though I didn't see the whole deck. I would not be surprised if your earlier assessment was correct and Alan shaved a few Ulamogs here.
Possible misstep by Alan here. He has a tapped land in his hand, which he did not play to conceal information. But if he trades off the Lumbering Falls this turn, then he's going to be stuck at 9 mana.
wow.
Whereas if he had played the tapped land and kept the basic in hand, things would work out a lot cleaner for him.
And Sylvan Advocate pumping up Hissing Quagmire and
Wow, that's a huge draw.
enabling an attack with Matthias from Rishkar and Hissing Quagmire, a 3/3 and a 5/5.
Also could come up if he was to draw something like Censor, cycle and still have 10 mana left is relevant.
Glimmer of Genius, but hope fading for Emory Allen here at 1 life, facing down 3, potentially 4 attackers. And that'll do it. Emory Allen offers the handshake. Matthias Hunt advances to 9-0. One of the few undefeated players here playing Black-Green Constrictor. And that'll do it for round 9 here from Grand Prix Omaha.